A rejected dog. Every family turned him away, growling, trembling, too broken to love. But when a small-town vet reads the words hidden inside his collar, he bursts into tears. Because this dog isn't what anyone thinks. He carries a secret left behind by someone long gone, a message that could expose a buried truth or destroy everything left standing. Now, a quiet man who's lost his purpose and a grieving vet who's lost his faith will have to follow where this dog leads, straight into danger, loss, and the kind of truth that changes lives forever. Who trained this dog? And what did they leave behind for the man brave enough to listen? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. Rain drummed against the metal roof of Port Westcott Animal Shelter, each drop a tiny hammer striking in the darkness. Hollis Brandt pulled his jacket tighter as he made his final rounds, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The October wind whipped off the Maine coast, carrying the tang of salt and approaching winter. At 45 years old, he'd done this walk 1,000 times. Check the locks, make sure the heating system was running, look for any problems that couldn't wait until morning. Simple tasks that filled his nights since leaving the army, trading battlefield medicine for maintaining this small shelter in a forgotten corner of coastal Maine. His boots scraped against wet concrete as he rounded the building's corner. The beam of his flashlight caught a flicker of movement near the dumpsters. Hollis froze, muscles tensing with old instincts. He swept the light back, revealing a pair of eyes reflecting gold in the darkness. A dog. Large, with the lean build and pointed ears of a shepherd mix. The animal didn't bolt or bark, it just watched him with an unnervingly steady gaze. "Hey there," Hollis said softly, crouching down. The rain plastered his gray-streaked hair to his forehead. "Where'd you come from?" The dog's fur was matted and dark with rain, but Hollis could see the marks of neglect, ribs showing through its coat, healing scratches on its muzzle. Yet something about its posture caught his attention. The way it held perfectly still, head level, eyes tracking every movement. This wasn't some panicked stray. "You've had training," Hollis murmured. "Military, maybe?" He'd seen enough working dogs in the service to recognize that controlled alertness. The shelter's back door creaked open, spilling yellow light into the rain. "Hollis, you still out here?" It was Sarah Chen, one of the younger volunteers who sometimes worked late. The dog's ears flattened, but it didn't run. "Yeah," Hollis called back. "Found something you should see." Sarah stepped out, holding her jacket over her head. When she spotted the shepherd mix, she sucked in a sharp breath. "Oh no, that's the one from last week. The aggressive case." "Aggressive?" Hollis kept his eye, voice low, staying in his crouch. The dog hadn't shown a hint of aggression, just that unwavering watchfulness. "Someone brought him in, said they found him wandering near the highway, but he wouldn't let anyone handle him. Snapped at Doc Morris during the exam. We had to turn him away, liability issues." Sarah shook her head. "He's been hanging around ever since. Nobody can get near him." Hollis studied the dog more carefully. The animal's eyes held a wariness born of experience, not fear. Its muscles were tense but controlled. Every movement had purpose. "This dog's been trained," he said. "Military or police work, I'd bet money on it. That's not aggression you're seeing. It's discipline." Sarah gave him a skeptical look. "How can you tell?" "Served as a medic. Worked with K9 units sometimes. This boy's got all the markers." Hollis slowly extended his hand, palm down, letting the dog catch his scent. "Look at how he holds himself, the way he tracks movement. Someone put a lot of work into him." The shepherd mix took a careful step forward, nose twitching. There was intelligence in those eyes, and something else. Something that tugged at memories Hollis usually kept buried. "We can't take him in," Sarah said. "Director's orders. He's already been labeled as dangerous." Rain continued to pour, running in rivulets down the dog's fur. Hollis thought of his empty apartment, the quiet that sometimes grew too loud late at night. He thought of other abandoned soldiers he'd known, good men and women who just needed someone to see past their sharp edges. "I'll take him," Hollis said, "just for tonight. Get him out of this weather." "Hollis, you can't. The liability." "I'm not taking him into the shelter. He'll stay with me, off premises. My responsibility." He kept his eyes on the dog as he spoke. "What do you say, boy? Warm bed and some dinner sound good?" The shepherd mix took another step forward, close enough now that Hollis could feel its warm breath on his hand. After a moment's hesitation, a rough tongue swiped across his fingers. Sarah made a sound of disbelief. "I've never seen him let anyone that close." "Sometimes you just have to speak the right language." Hollis slowly stood, and the dog rose with him, staying close to his leg. "I've got some leftover meatloaf at home. Should do for tonight." "This is a bad idea," Sarah warned. "If anything happens, nothing will happen." Hollis felt the dog's shoulder brush against his knee, a solid presence in the rain. He just needs someone to give him a chance. The walk home was wet, but peaceful. The shepherd mix stayed perfectly at heel, navigating the darkened streets as if he'd been trained for night operations, which, Hollis suspected, he probably had been. His apartment sat above an old hardware store, accessed by a narrow staircase that creaked under their wet boots. The dog followed him up without hesitation, though Hollis noticed how it cleared each corner with military precision, checking sight lines. Inside, Hollis toweled them both dry while his ancient heating system rattled to life. The dog accepted the handling calmly, those intelligent eyes never leaving Hollis's face. "You've got stories to tell, don't you?" Hollis murmured, working a knot out of the animal's fur. "Wonder what brought you here?" The shepherd mix just watched him, carrying secrets behind that steady gaze. Hollis recognized that look. He'd seen it in mirrors often enough. The weight of things unsaid, missions that left marks invisible to civilian eyes. True to his word, Hollis shared his meatloaf. The dog ate with the same controlled precision it showed in everything else, though hunger showed in how thoroughly it cleaned the bowl. "We'll figure something out tomorrow," Hollis told him, settling onto his worn couch. "Find out where you came from, who trained you." The dog lay down near his feet, alert but relaxed for the first time since Hollis had found him. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, but the apartment felt less empty now, filled with the quiet breathing of two soldiers who recognized something in each other. Hollis knew he was probably breaking a dozen shelter policies, knew Sarah was right about the liability issues. But watching the shepherd mix finally allow himself to rest, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Sometimes the right thing didn't fit neatly into rules and regulations. Sometimes you had to trust your instincts, even when they led you down unexpected paths. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, in places where following orders and doing what was right didn't always align. The dog's eyes drifted closed, though Hollis noticed how its ears still tracked every sound. He smiled slightly, remembering other vigilant sleepers he'd known, other warriors who never fully stood down, even in safety. "Welcome home, soldier," he murmured. "For tonight, at least." The shepherd mix's tail thumped once against the floor, acknowledgement from one veteran to another, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Hollis felt the quiet in his apartment shift from emptiness to peace. Outside, Port Westcott slept through the storm, unaware that this simple act of kindness would set in motion events that would shake the small coastal town to its foundations. But that was tomorrow's concern. For now, there was just rain, warmth, and two lonely souls who had found something they recognized in each other. Hollis settled deeper into his couch, letting the steady sound of the dog's breathing mix with the rainfall. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight was for rest, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the most important choices were the ones that seemed smallest at the time. The shepherd mix sighed contentedly, and Hollis felt an answering peace settle over him. Sometimes, he thought, salvation came on 4 legs, wearing fur and carrying wisdom in eyes too knowing for a simple stray. Sometimes it came in the choice to see worth where others saw only danger, to offer shelter when others turned away. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Hollis pulled up to the Port Westcott Veterinary Clinic. The old brick building sat quiet and stern against the pale dawn sky, much like its owner. The shepherd mix sat calmly in the passenger seat, those watchful eyes taking in every detail. Dr. Keene opens early, Hollis explained, though he wasn't sure why he felt the need to talk to the dog. Best vet in town, even if he's not exactly the friendly type. The dog's ears perked at his words. A subtle shift that Hollis had started noticing meant attention rather than alarm. Everything about this animal spoke of training and intelligence. They climbed the worn concrete steps to the clinic's entrance. A bell chimed softly as they entered the empty waiting room, where the sharp scent of disinfectant hung in the air. Behind the counter, a young receptionist looked up from her computer. "Mr. Brandt, Dr. Keene is ready for you." Hollis nodded, guiding the dog through to the examination room. Dr. Rowan Keene stood at a steel table, arranging instruments with methodical precision. He looked exactly as Hollis remembered from previous visits, tall and spare, with salt-flecked dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses that did nothing to soften his clinical gaze. "Good morning," Keene said without looking up. "Sarah called ahead about your guest." The words carried a hint of disapproval, but Hollis had expected that. Keene's reputation for cold efficiency was well known in Port Westcott. Some said he'd always been that way. Others claimed he'd changed after his wife's death 5 years ago. Either way, he was still the best veterinarian on the coast. "Found him behind the shelter last night," Hollis explained, watching as the shepherd mix studied Keene with unusual intensity. "Thought he should get checked out." Keene finally looked up, his expression shifting slightly as he took in the dog. Something flickered in those tired eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. But it was gone before Hollis could be sure. "Up on the table," Keene instructed, his voice professionally neutral. The dog complied without hesitation, settling into a perfect sit. Keene's eyebrows rose slightly at the display of training. "Military?" he asked, beginning his examination. Hollis shrugged. "Seems likely. His movements are too disciplined for a regular stray." Keene nodded, running practiced hands over the dog's frame. "Good muscle tone despite recent weight loss. No signs of illness or injury beyond surface scratches. Coat's been maintained until recently." His fingers found the worn collar, turning it to check for tags. That's when everything changed. Keene's hands suddenly froze. His face, usually a mask of professional detachment, went pale. Hollis watched as the veterinarian's fingers trembled slightly, tracing something on the inside of the collar. "Dr. Keene?" The vet didn't respond. He was staring at the collar as if it held answers to questions he'd never dared to ask. With careful movements, he turned the leather band inside out, revealing stitching that had been hidden against the dog's neck. Faded thread formed words in delicate handwriting. "Rowan, Trust the dog. Hollis saw the moment Keen's composure cracked. The vet's hands fell away from the collar as if it had burned him. He took a stumbling step backward, colliding with a cabinet. That's... Keen's voice was barely a whisper. That's Lorna's handwriting. The name hung in the air between them. Everyone in Port Westcott knew about Lorna Keen's death, the brilliant environmental researcher who had disappeared 5 years ago, her body found weeks later in what was ruled an accident. Her loss had transformed her husband from a passionate advocate for wildlife protection into the remote figure who stood before them now. The shepherd mix whined softly, touching his nose to Keen's hand. The vet flinched away as if the gentle contact had shocked him. "He needs to be quarantined," Keen said abruptly, his voice rough. "We don't know where he's been, what diseases he might carry." But Hollis saw the fear beneath the professional excuse, saw how Keen's eyes kept returning to that hidden message, as if afraid it might vanish, or afraid it might be real. "No," Hollis said quietly but firmly. "He's staying with me." "This isn't a request, Mr. Brandt. As the town's primary veterinarian—" "He's healthy and he's not aggressive," Hollis interrupted. "You just confirmed both. There's no medical reason for quarantine." The shepherd mix moved closer to Hollis, pressing against his leg in a show of trust that said more than words could. Keen watched the interaction, his clinical mask slipping to reveal something raw and painful underneath. "That message," Hollis said carefully. "Your wife left it for a reason." "You don't know anything about my wife," Keen snapped, but his voice cracked on the last word. He turned away, bracing himself against the examination table. "Just take him and go. But if anything happens—" "Nothing will happen," Hollis assured him, the same words he'd used with Sarah the night before. "But whatever this is, whatever that message means, running from it won't make it go away." Keen didn't respond, his shoulders rigid with tension. The shepherd mix looked between them, then back to the collar that had caused such upheaval. Hollis felt the weight of secrets gathering in the small examination room. The dog's mysterious past, Lorna's hidden message, Keen's buried grief. "Come on, boy," Hollis said softly. The dog followed him to the door, but not before giving Keen one last look that seemed almost apologetic. They were almost out when Keen's voice stopped them. "Mr. Brandt," Hollis turned. The vet still hadn't moved from the table, but his voice had lost some of its professional distance. "Be careful," Keen said. "Lorna never did anything without a reason." Hollis nodded, understanding the warning beneath the words. As they walked out into the brightening morning, he could feel the weight of Keen's gaze following them, heavy with questions neither of them yet had answers to. The shepherd mix kept pace beside him, his presence solid and reassuring. Whatever secrets that collar held, whatever had brought this trained military dog to Port Westcott with a dead woman's message, Hollis knew they'd only scratched the surface. Word spread through Port Westcott like wildfire. In a small coastal town where everyone knew everyone else's business, news of the dangerous dog's return to the shelter traveled quickly. By mid-morning, the whispers had reached the office of Animal Control Chief Marla Dykes. Marla stood at her window, arms crossed, watching the shelter's parking lot with narrowed eyes. Her heavy frame tensed as she observed Hollis Brandt walking the shepherd mix around the perimeter of the building. The sight made her jaw clench. "I told them to get rid of that dog," she muttered, turning to her desk phone. She punched in numbers with more force than necessary. "Sarah, get me the incident reports on that shepherd from last month. All of them." Inside the shelter, Hollis noticed how the dog moved with purpose, not the random wandering of a typical stray. The shepherd's head lifted at every sound, ears swiveling with military precision. When a police siren wailed in the distance, the dog immediately began circling, tracking the sound with intense focus. "You're not just some random stray, are you?" Hollis murmured, watching as the dog sniffed methodically around the shelter's back doors. The animal's movements were too deliberate, too practiced. Years of medical training in the Army had taught Hollis to recognize patterns, and everything about this dog screamed specialized training. The shepherd suddenly stopped at one particular door, nose working overtime. His posture changed, alert, focused, almost aggressive. Hollis approached carefully, noting how the dog's attention remained fixed on the door's hinges. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly. The dog whined, pawing at the bottom of the door before looking back at Hollis with clear intelligence in his eyes. A loud bang from the front office made them both jump. Marla Dykes stood in the doorway, her bulk filling the frame as she glared at Hollis. "Brant!" she barked. "What part of that dog needs to go wasn't clear enough for you?" The shepherd's hackles rose slightly, but he didn't growl. Instead, he positioned himself between Hollis and Marla, body language protective rather than aggressive. "He's not dangerous," Hollis said calmly, noting how the dog maintained perfect positioning without command. "Dr. Keene cleared him this morning." Marla's face reddened. "Keene? That emotionless robot barely qualifies as a vet anymore. Not since—" She cut herself off, but her meaning hung in the air. "Not since Lorna died." "The dog stays," Hollis said firmly, "unless you can show me actual documentation of aggressive incidents." Marla's eyes narrowed to slits. "You're maintenance staff, Brant. Don't forget that. This isn't your call to make." Throughout the confrontation, the shepherd remained alert but calm, his behavior a stark contrast to the dangerous label he'd been given. When Marla finally stormed off, the dog immediately returned to his methodical inspection of the building. Hollis spent the rest of the morning observing the dog's behavior. The shepherd worked in patterns, checking doors, windows, and air vents with what seemed like trained precision. When delivery trucks arrived, he tracked their movement. When strange cars pulled into the lot, he positioned himself for optimal viewing. During their lunch break, Hollis sat in the staff room, making notes about the dog's behavior patterns. The shepherd lay at his feet, but his ears never stopped moving, tracking every sound in the building. Sarah, the young receptionist, poked her head in. "Hollis, Dr. Keene called. He's not coming in today. Said he's not feeling well." She hesitated. He sounded strange, almost scared. Hollis wasn't surprised. The message in the collar had shaken Keene badly. What had Lorna known? What had she been trying to tell her husband? The afternoon brought more revealing moments. During a fire truck's passage, the dog executed a perfect tracking circle, nose up, reading the air currents. When a suspicious-looking man lingered too long near the shelter's vehicles, the shepherd moved to the window, body language shifting to alert mode without any aggressive display. "Military working dog," Hollis muttered to himself, watching the shepherd track another passing vehicle. "But what were you trained for? Explosives? Narcotics?" The dog's head snapped around at his words, eyes intense and focused. Late afternoon found them in the shelter's back exercise yard. The shepherd worked the perimeter with the same methodical focus he'd shown all day. Hollis noticed he paid special attention to drain pipes and air vents, suggesting possible detection training. A shadow fell across the yard. Marla stood at the fence, a thick folder clutched in her hands. "I've got the incident reports right here, Brant," she said, voice dripping with satisfaction. "This dog has a history. He's going to the county facility tomorrow morning." The shepherd stopped his inspection, watching Marla with calculated intensity. Still no aggression, Hollis noted, just careful observation and positioning. "Show me," Hollis challenged, extending his hand for the folder. Marla hugged it closer. These are official records. You don't have clearance. Then they don't exist, Hollis replied simply. The dog moved to stand beside him, their shadows merging in the late afternoon light. Marla's face twisted with rage. This isn't over, Brant. That dog is dangerous, whether you believe it or not. And I'm going to prove it. Oof. As she stormed away, Hollis looked down at his four-legged companion. The shepherd met his gaze steadily, intelligence and purpose clear in his eyes. This was no ordinary stray. This was a highly trained animal with a specific mission. But what was it? And how did it connect to Lorna Keene's last message? Across town, Dr. Rowan Keene sat in his darkened house, a glass of untouched whiskey before him. Lorna's last words kept cycling through his mind. Trust the dog. After 5 years of wondering what really happened to his wife, could the answer have finally arrived on 4 legs? His phone rang, the shelter's number. He let it go to voicemail, unable to face any more revelations today. The message his wife had hidden in that collar had cracked open wounds he'd thought long scarred over. What had Lorna known? What had she been trying to tell him? The shepherd's intense gaze haunted him. Those weren't the eyes of a dangerous stray. They were the eyes of an animal with a purpose, a mission. Just like Lorna had always had a purpose, always been working toward something bigger than herself, something that might have gotten her killed. Back at the shelter, Hollis watched the shepherd track another passing siren, his movements precise and practiced. Whatever this dog was trained for, whoever had sent him, they were part of something bigger. Something that had started with Lorna Keene's death and led, somehow, to this moment. The dog finished his circle and returned to Hollis's side, alert and waiting, ready for whatever came next. Hollis reached down to scratch behind the shepherd's ears, earning a brief tail wag that didn't diminish the animal's focused demeanor. "What are you trying to tell us, boy?" Hollis murmured. The dog's ears twitched, but his eyes remained fixed on the horizon, watching, waiting, protecting, just as he'd been trained to do. The morning dawned gray and heavy with tension. Hollis arrived early at the shelter, his mind still churning over the shepherd's peculiar behaviors from yesterday. The local news played quietly from the break room radio as he went about his morning tasks. "Breaking news from Port Westcott," the announcer's voice cut through the usual morning chatter. Local teenager Ruth Dameron was reported missing last night. The 16-year-old was last seen walking home from her after-school job at Maxwell's Grocery. Anyone with information is urged to contact the police immediately. Hollis froze, mop suspended mid-stroke. Ruth Dameron. He knew her. Everyone did in a town this size. She was the kind of kid who volunteered at beach cleanups and helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. The kind of kid who always had a friendly wave for everyone, even the quiet maintenance man at the animal shelter. The shepherd, who had been dozing in the corner, lifted his head sharply at the news bulletin. His ears pricked forward, body tensing with sudden alertness. Within hours, the shelter became a hub of activity. Police officers arrived to set up a temporary command post, bringing with them items collected from Ruth's last known location. Among them was a pale blue scarf, found tangled in bushes along her usual walking route. Officer Jensen placed the scarf on the evidence table. "We're documenting everything before sending it to the lab," he explained, pulling out his camera. The shepherd's reaction was immediate and striking. He rose from his spot near Hollis's desk and approached the table with deliberate steps. His nose twitched, taking in the scent. Then he let out a deep, controlled whine, not the sound of an anxious dog, but something purposeful, professional. "Wait," Hollis said, watching the dog's behavior intently. "I've seen this before, in Afghanistan. This isn't random, he's signaling. This is what search and rescue dogs do when they pick up a target scent." The room fell silent. The shepherd maintained his position, eyes locked on the scarf, body rigid with focused energy. "That's impossible," Officer Jensen scoffed. "This is just that stray everyone's been complaining about." But Hollis was already pulling out his phone, dialing Dr. Keene's number. To his surprise, Rowan answered on the first ring. "Did Lorna work with search and rescue dogs?" Hollis asked without preamble. The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats. When Rowan finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Yes. She specialized in training them for wilderness and disaster response. How did you know?" "Because I'm watching one of them right now," Hollis replied. "Your wife's dog. He's alerting on evidence from the Dameron girl's disappearance." Another long pause. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. True to his word, Rowan arrived precisely 10 minutes later, looking haunted but determined. His eyes went immediately to the shepherd, who was still maintaining his alert posture near the evidence table. "Show me," Rowan said quietly. Officer Jensen produced the scarf again. The shepherd repeated his controlled alert, adding a soft but insistent pawing motion this time. Rowan's professional detachment cracked. That's exactly how Lorna trained them. The whine, the paw signal, it's her exact protocol." He sank into a nearby chair, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. "She developed a unique training method for scent detection. Said it was more reliable than standard techniques." "Then this dog isn't just trained," Hollis pressed. "He's one of hers, one she worked with personally." "Must be," Rowan agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't recognize him from her program. And believe me, I knew all her dogs." The implications hung heavy in the air. A highly trained search and rescue dog connected to Lorna Keene, appearing just as a local girl went missing. The coincidence seemed impossible. Hollis squared his shoulders. "We need to let him search. He's trying to tell us he can help." "Absolutely not," Officer Jensen interrupted. "We have professional K-9 units coming from Portland. We can't waste time with some mysterious stray." "Every minute counts in a missing persons case," Hollis countered, his voice steady but intense. "You know that. This dog is trained, he's alerting, and he might be our best chance at finding Ruth before—" He left the sentence unfinished, but everyone heard the unspoken possibilities. Rowan stood up slowly, seeming to come to a decision. "I'll vouch for the dog's training," he said. "If this is one of Lorna's animals, he's better qualified than most K-9 units. Her dogs found people others couldn't, saved lives others had given up on." Officer Jensen looked between them, clearly weighing his options. "If anything goes wrong, it's on your heads," he finally said. "Both of you." "I'll handle the dog," Hollis volunteered immediately. "Dr. Keene can advise on commands and signals." The shepherd, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, stood at perfect attention, every line of his body expressing readiness and purpose. This, Hollis realized, was what the dog had been waiting for. This was his mission. Rowan nodded slowly. "Lorna always said every dog had a purpose, that sometimes we just had to be patient enough to discover what it was." He turned to Officer Jensen. "Let's get your search team organized. Time is wasting." As the police began mobilizing their resources, Hollis knelt beside the shepherd. The dog's eyes met his, clear and focused, ready to fulfill the purpose Lorna Keene had trained him for. "Find her, boy," Hollis whispered. "Find Ruth." The dog's tail gave a single, determined wag. He understood. He had always understood. Now it was time to prove it. The autumn wind whipped across the coastal cliffs as the search team assembled in the parking lot of Port Westcott High School. Ruth Dameron's last known location. Dark clouds threatened rain, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Hollis held the shepherd's leash firmly, watching the dog's alert posture as Officer Jensen briefed the volunteers. "We'll split into 4 groups," Jensen announced, pointing to marked areas on a local map. "Standard grid pattern, maintaining radio contact. Dr. Keene and Brandt will work with the dog in Sector 3, along the coastal path." Rowan stood slightly apart from the group, his face drawn with tension. As the teams dispersed, Hollis guided the shepherd toward their assigned sector, with Rowan falling into step beside them. "Your wife," Hollis said carefully, breaking the heavy silence between them. "She worked with search and rescue dogs for a long time?" Rowan's shoulders stiffened. 15 years. She was one of the best trainers on the East Coast. He paused, swallowing hard. Until 2 years ago. The shepherd led them down a narrow trail that wound through scrubby pines toward the coastline. His nose worked steadily, tracking something only he could detect. "What happened 2 years ago?" Hollis asked, though something in Rowan's tone made him suspect he already knew. Rowan stopped walking, his face a mask of carefully controlled grief. "There was a fire. At the old boathouse where she kept her records and did some of her training." His voice grew hoarse. "They said it was an electrical fault. The building went up so fast. By the time anyone noticed, the wind carried the salt spray up from the rocks below, mixing with the scent of pine needles." The shepherd paused, lifting his head to test the air. "I'm sorry," Hollis said quietly. "That must have been devastating." "It was more than that," Rowan continued, his words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. "It wasn't just Lorna we lost that night. All her research, her case files, her training records, everything burned. Years of work, gone in hours." He ran a hand through his salt-flecked hair. "And the timing. God, the timing." The shepherd tugged at his leash, eager to continue down the path. But Hollis held firm. "What about the timing?" Rowan's eyes darted around, checking they were alone. "She'd been investigating something. Environmental violations along the coast. She was gathering evidence, building a case." His voice dropped lower. "Against Clive Pendrick." The name hit Hollis like a physical blow. Everyone in Port Westcott knew Clive Pendrick, the developer who'd been buying up coastal properties, promising economic revival through luxury developments. His smiling face appeared regularly in local papers, always announcing some new charitable initiative or community project. "She found something?" Hollis prompted. "She never told me exactly what. Said it was safer if I didn't know the details." Rowan's laugh was bitter. "She was protecting me, but I knew it was serious. She was working with some environmental watchdog group, documenting illegal waste dumping, permit violations, God knows what else." He took off his glasses, wiping them with shaking hands. The night before the fire, she said she finally had enough evidence to take to the authorities. The shepherd whined softly, pulling again at his leash. This time Hollis let him lead them forward, his mind racing with implications. "Did the police investigate? The fire?" "Of course. Found nothing suspicious." Rowan's mouth twisted. "Just like they found nothing suspicious about the construction permits Pendrick keeps getting approved. Nothing suspicious about the environmental impact studies that always come back clean." He shook his head. "Money talks in Port Westcott, and nobody talks louder than Clive Pendrick." The path curved sharply, bringing them to a clifftop overlook. Below, the gray waves crashed against jagged rocks. In the distance, they could see the skeletal framework of Pendrick's newest development project rising against the skyline. The shepherd's behavior suddenly changed. His nose dropped to the ground, tracking back and forth with increased intensity. His tail went rigid. "He's got something," Hollis said, watching Foifai dog's movements carefully. This is different from before. Rowan knelt beside the dog, studying his body language. This is exactly how Lorna's dogs worked when they were closing in on a target. His voice caught. I watched her training sessions hundreds of times. This dog, he's using all her techniques, but I still can't place him from her program. The shepherd led them off the main path, following a barely visible track through the underbrush. As they pushed through the dense vegetation, Hollis's mind was working overtime, connecting pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed until now. A trained search and rescue dog appears, carrying a hidden message from Lorna. A teenage girl goes missing. And underneath it all, the shadow of Clive Pendrick and whatever secrets Lorna had discovered about his operations. Your wife, Hollis said carefully, ducking under a low branch. Did she ever mention training a dog specifically for evidence detection? Not just search and rescue, but something more specialized? Rowan froze mid-step. How did you... He stared at the shepherd, with new understanding dawning in his eyes. The last few months before she died, she was working with a new dog, said it was a special project, something different from her usual training programs. His voice grew urgent. She was so secretive about it. Wouldn't even let me meet the dog, said it was safer that way. The shepherd stopped suddenly, letting out a low whine. They had reached a small clearing, unremarkable except for the fresh tire tracks cutting through the mud. Safer, Hollis repeated, studying the ground. Because the dog wasn't just trained to find people, he was trained to find evidence, to be a witness. Rowan's face had gone pale. You think Lorna knew she was in danger? That she trained this dog as insurance somehow? The message in his collar wasn't just about trusting the dog to help find Ruth, Hollis said slowly. I think your wife left us a key to unlocking whatever she discovered about Pendrick. Something even fire couldn't destroy. The shepherd stood at alert, his nose working the air methodically. Somewhere in the distance, they heard the faint wail of sirens. If you're right, Rowan said, his voice barely above a whisper, then Lorna's death wasn't an accident, Hollis finished grimly, and whoever was responsible might be connected to Ruth's disappearance too. The shepherd's whine grew more insistent. He had found something in the clearing, something that made his training kick into high gear. As Hollis moved to investigate, the weight of what they were uncovering settled over him like a physical presence. This wasn't just about finding a missing girl anymore. They were pulling on threads that led back to Lorna's death, to corporate corruption, to secrets powerful people had killed to keep buried. And their only guide was a mysterious dog, carrying the last message of a dead woman who had seen it all coming. The search for Ruth, Dameron had just become much more dangerous and much more important than anyone had realized. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Marla Dykes' heavy footsteps echoed through the shelter's corridors. Her face was set in hard lines as she strode past the kennels, clipboard clutched tight in one hand. The dogs fell silent as she passed, sensing the tension rolling off her in waves. Hollis looked up from where he was fixing a loose door hinge, immediately noting her purposeful approach and the official-looking papers in her grip. Behind him, the shepherd, who he'd started calling Gideon in his head, went still and alert. Mr. Brandt, Marla's voice carried its usual edge of authority, but today there was something else there too, something almost like satisfaction. I have here an order for the immediate seizure of this dangerous animal. She thrust the papers toward him. Hollis didn't take them, his hand staying steady on his tools. Dangerous? Based on what evidence? Multiple complaints from concerned citizens, reports of aggressive behavior. She smiled thinly. And of course, the dog's unknown history. We can't have an animal with no records, no verification of shots, running loose in our facility. He's not running loose, Hollis said quietly. He's under control and showing clear signs of professional training. That's not your call to make. Marla's voice sharpened. I've spoken with Mr. Pendrick about this situation. He shares my concerns about liability. The mention of Pendrick's name made something click in Hollis's mind. Of course, the developer would want the dog removed, especially if there was any chance it could lead them to evidence about Lorna's death or Ruth's disappearance. I need that animal surrendered immediately, Marla continued. If you resist, I'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement. From the corner of his eye, Hollis saw Nell Whitaker appear in the doorway. The young shelter volunteer had been quietly observing their exchange, her usual warm expression replaced by concern. Chief Dykes, Nell spoke up, her voice steady despite the tension. I've been working with this dog all week. He's shown absolutely no signs of aggression. In fact, he's one of the most well-behaved animals I've ever— Miss Whitaker, Marla cut her off. Your amateur observations are not relevant to this official action. The dog goes into quarantine today, pending further evaluation. Hollis knew what further evaluation meant in Marla's hands. The dog would disappear, just like any evidence it might lead them to. He couldn't let that happen. I need 24 hours, he said, meeting Marla's sharp gaze, to get his paperwork in order. You have until noon, Marla snapped. After that, I'm coming back with backup. She turned on her heel and strode out, leaving the air thick with unspoken threats. As soon as she was gone, Nell hurried over. Hollis, you can't let her take him. There's something wrong about all this. I can feel it. He nodded, already formulating a plan. I know, and I won't. He looked at her carefully, weighing his next words. But I might need your help. Nell's face softened with determination. Whatever you need. I trust your judgment. Over the next few hours, they worked quickly and quietly. Nell gathered supplies, food, water, basic medical items, while Hollis finished his maintenance rounds to avoid suspicion. The shepherd seemed to sense the urgency, staying close and watchful. Just before 11 o'clock, Hollis led the dog out through the shelter's back door, where Nell was waiting with her old pickup truck. They had lined the truck bed with blankets and created a hidden space behind some tools and supply boxes. My cabin's about 20 minutes out of town, Hollis explained as they carefully settled the shepherd into the concealed spot. It's private property, surrounded by woods. Marla won't have jurisdiction there. Nell nodded, her curly auburn hair catching the morning light. I'll follow in my car. Just in case anyone's watching, it'll look more normal if we leave separately. The drive to Hollis's cabin was tense, every passing police car making his shoulders tighten. But they made it without incident, the dirt road to his property providing good visibility of any followers. The cabin was small but solid, set back from the road and sheltered by tall pines. As they got the shepherd settled inside, Hollis found himself noticing how naturally Nell moved through the space, her practical efficiency matching his own. It's not much, he said, suddenly aware of the cabin's sparse furnishings and lived-in feel. But it's secure. It's perfect, Nell replied, already setting up water bowls and arranging the supplies they'd brought. Remote enough to keep him safe, but close enough that we can still help with the search for Ruth. The shepherd, Gideon, Hollis decided he really was Gideon, explored the cabin thoroughly before settling near the window, his posture relaxed but vigilant. You really believe in him, don't you? Nell asked softly, watching Hollis check the locks one more time. In what he might know? I believe in what I've seen, Hollis answered. His training, his reactions to Ruth's scent, the message in his collar. It all means something. And whatever it is, Pendrick and Marla are afraid of it. Then we'll protect him, Nell said simply. She touched his arm briefly, the contact sending an unexpected warmth through him. I can take shifts here when you need to be at work. Between the two of us, we can keep him safe. Hollis looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same quiet strength he'd always admired from a distance. But now there was something more. A growing trust, a shared purpose that made his usual solitude feel less necessary. "Thank you," he said, meaning it more than she could know, "for believing in this, for helping." "Some things are worth the risk," Nell replied, her smile gentle but determined. "And I think this is one of them." They spent the afternoon setting up a routine, establishing signals and backup plans. Nell would come by during her breaks from the shelter, bringing news and supplies. Hollis would maintain his regular work schedule to avoid suspicion, but stay at the cabin nights. As evening approached, Hollis watched Nell's car disappear down the dirt road, Gideon a warm presence at his side. He knew there would be consequences for this defiance. His job, his safety, he'd put it all on the line. But looking at the shepherd's intelligent eyes, remembering Rowan's grief and Ruth's haunting absence, he knew he'd made the right choice. Some mysteries needed to be solved, some truths needed to be uncovered, no matter the cost. And with Nell's help, with this extraordinary dog's guidance, maybe they had a chance to do just that. For now, though, they would wait and watch and protect what needed protecting. The rest would come in its own time. The storm rolled in fast off the Atlantic, turning the morning sky into an angry mass of slate-gray clouds. Hollis stood at his cabin window, watching the pine trees bend and sway in the strengthening wind. Beside him, Gideon's ears perked up at the distant rumble of thunder. "Looks like we're in for a rough one," Hollis muttered. The weather forecast had warned of gale-force winds and heavy rain, but the intensity building offshore looked worse than predicted. His phone buzzed, a text from Nell. "Everything okay up there?" He typed back quickly. "All good. Battening down the hatches." The first fat raindrops hit the window pane just as emergency alerts started blaring from his phone. Coastal flood warnings, high wind advisories, and, most concerning, reports of boats in distress along the shoreline. Gideon's posture changed instantly at the sound of the alerts. His muscles tensed, head lifting in a way Hollis had come to recognize as his working stance. The shepherd moved to the door, looking back at Hollis with clear intent. "You want to go out there, don't you?" Hollis asked, though he already knew the answer. This was what the dog was trained for, finding people in trouble, helping those in danger. The wind howled as Hollis grabbed his emergency kit, the one he'd kept stocked since his army days, more out of habit than expectation of use. He pulled on his weatherproof jacket and grabbed a spare blanket for good measure. "All right, boy, let's see what you can do." They took Hollis's truck down to the coastal access road, where emergency vehicles were already gathering. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and the waves crashed against the rocks with frightening force. Through the windshield wipers, Hollis could see rescue workers pointing toward something in the distance. He pulled over and rolled down his window to catch fragments of their conversation over the storm. "Fisherman's skiff, overturned near Miller's. Point. Too rough for the rescue boat. Can't wait for the Coast Guard helicopter." Gideon was already pawing at the door, that same focused energy coursing through him. Hollis made a quick decision and grabbed his medical kit. "I've got a trained search and rescue dog," he called out to the nearest emergency worker, showing his old Army medic ID. "And medical training, we can help." The worker, clearly overwhelmed by the situation, barely hesitated before nodding. "Miller's Point. We've got a fisherman trapped under his boat. Water's rising." Hollis and Gideon made their way down the rocky shoreline, fighting against the wind and stinging rain. The shepherd moved with surprising surety over the slick rocks, pausing occasionally to check that Hollis was following. They found the overturned skiff about 400 yards down the coast, wedged against some rocks. The rising tide was already pushing waves halfway up its hull, and underneath, barely visible, was a man's arm waving weakly through a small gap. "Hold on!" Hollis shouted over the storm. "We're here to help!" Gideon was already circling the boat, checking angles and stability with the precision of a trained professional. He stopped at one spot, barking sharply to get Hollis's attention. Understanding clicked. This wasn't just any rescue dog. This was how Lorna had trained them, to assess situations and guide their human partners to the safest approach. Following Gideon's lead, Hollis found a spot where the rocks created a small barrier against the waves. The gap was larger here, and he could see the trapped fisherman's face, pale with cold and fear. "I'm a medic," Hollis called out. "Can you move at all?" My leg's stuck," the man gasped. "Something's got it pinned." The tide was rising faster now. They had minutes, not hours. Hollis looked at the boat's position, then at Gideon, who stood ready and waiting. "I need you to be my eyes, boy," Hollis said firmly. "Show me where it's safe." As if understanding every word, Gideon began a methodical inspection of the area around the boat. His movements were precise, purposeful, testing each spot before indicating with a particular bark whether it was stable or dangerous. Using Gideon's guidance, Hollis managed to wedge himself partway under the hull. The fisherman's leg was indeed trapped, caught between a rock and part of the boat's structure. But with careful maneuvering. "When I say now," Hollis instructed, "I need you to push up with everything you've got." He positioned himself and counted down. 3, 2, 1, now. The fisherman pushed while Hollis pulled, muscles straining against the weight. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then something shifted, and suddenly the man's leg came free. Gideon was there instantly, helping to guide them both out from under the hull seconds before a larger wave crashed over it. The shepherd stayed close as they made their way back to safer ground, offering balance when either man stumbled on the slick rocks. By the time they reached the emergency vehicles, Hollis's old field medical training had kicked in completely. He checked the fisherman's vitals, treated him for exposure, and properly stabilized his injured leg while waiting for the ambulance to arrive. "That's some dog you've got," the fisherman said through chattering teeth, watching Gideon shake off the rain but maintain his alert posture. "Never seen anything like it. The way he worked out there, like he knew exactly what to do." "He did," Hollis replied quietly, remembering Rowan's words about Lorna's training program. "He's a professional." Later, after the fisherman had been safely transported to the hospital, Hollis stood in the rain with Gideon, watching the emergency vehicles disperse. The shepherd's fur was soaked, but his bearing remained proud, satisfied, the look of a working dog who had done his job well. Hollis crouched down beside him, feeling a surge of pride and affection. "Good boy," he said softly. "You showed them exactly what you can do." His phone buzzed again. Rowan this time. "Heard about the rescue. The dog. It was Lorna's work, wasn't it? The way he handled it?" "Every move," Hollis typed back. "Professional search and rescue, just like you said. Whatever happened to your wife, she knew what she was doing. And so does he." Gideon pressed against his leg, warm despite the cold rain, and Hollis felt the rightness of their partnership settle into his bones. This was what the dog was meant for. This was why he'd been drawn to protect him, why Lorna had trusted him with her message. Now they just had to figure out what else Gideon knew, and why certain people were so determined to keep him quiet. The morning after the rescue, Clive Pendrick stood at his office window, staring down at the newspaper headline, "Local hero and rescue dog save fisherman." His manicured fingers crumpled the paper's edge. "This maintenance worker," he said, voice controlled but tight, Tell me everything." His assistant cleared her throat. "Hollis Brandt, sir, former Army medic, works at the shelter. He's been asking questions about the old boathouse fire and—" She hesitated. "He's been seen with Dr. Keene." Pendrick's reflection showed a flash of concern before smoothing back into its usual polish. "Keene? Lorna's widower?" "Yes, sir. They've been meeting regularly since the dog appeared." The dog. Pendrick remembered Lorna Keene's animals, how they could find anything, or anyone, she trained them to seek. How inconvenient that one had survived. "Get me Marla Dykes," he ordered. "Now." At his clinic, Rowan was finishing his morning rounds when Marla burst through the door. Her heavy frame blocked the exit as she pulled out an official-looking envelope. "Doctor," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "we need to discuss your license renewal." Rowan kept his face neutral, though his heart rate picked up. "My renewal isn't due for 8 months." "Things change." Marla smiled, all teeth. "Especially when veterinarians start causing trouble, supporting dangerous animals, making accusations about respected citizens." She dropped the envelope on his desk. Inside were photographs. Him meeting with Hollis, Gideon at various locations, documentation of every move they'd made. "Drop the matter," Marla said flatly. "Or lose everything. Your choice." Rowan's hands trembled slightly as he looked at the photos. "This is illegal surveillance. No, this is protecting the community from a potentially dangerous animal and the people enabling it." Her voice hardened. "Think about your practice, doctor. All those animals depending on you. Would be a shame if the board found reason to shut you down." She left him standing there, the threat hanging heavy in the air. Rowan picked up his phone, then set it down again. Warning Hollis might only make things worse. That evening, Hollis and Nell drove back from checking on a potential witness, someone who'd seen strange activity near the boathouse before the fire. Gideon sat alert in the back seat of Nell's truck, ears pricked forward. "You really think Lorna found something?" Nell asked, glancing at Hollis. "Something worth—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Worth killing for?" Hollis completed grimly. "Look at how they're reacting now, just because we're asking questions." The road wound through dark woods, their headlights the only illumination. Suddenly, Gideon growled, a low, warning sound. Hollis straightened. "Nell, slow down." Through the trees ahead, headlights flashed, multiple vehicles. As they rounded the curve, 3 black SUVs blocked the road. "Back up," Hollis said sharply. "Now!" Nell threw the truck into reverse, just as men emerged from the SUVs, moving with military precision. A spotlight blinded them. "Hold it right there," a voice commanded. "Animal control, we're here for the dog." "Like hell," Nell muttered, wheeling the truck around in a sharp turn that sent gravel flying. Gideon braced himself, completely steady despite the motion. Headlights appeared behind them as 2 of the SUVs gave chase. Nell gripped the wheel, face set with determination as she navigated the back roads she'd known since childhood. "Left here," she called out, taking a sharp turn onto an even narrower track. "They won't know these logging roads." The truck bounced and swayed as she expertly maneuvered through the darkness. Hollis held on, dividing his attention between the pursuit behind them and Gideon, who remained alertly scanning their surroundings. "There's an old bridge up ahead," Nell said tensely. "It's barely wide enough for 1 vehicle." They could hear the SUVs gaining. Hollis checked their pursuers in the side mirror. "They're splitting up, trying to cut us off." "Not happening." Nell's jaw was set as she pushed the truck faster. "Hold on." They burst through the trees onto a narrow wooden bridge, spanning a deep ravine. The ancient planks creaked under their wheels. Behind them, 1 SUV started to follow, then suddenly braked hard, unwilling to risk the crossing. Nell didn't slow until they'd put several miles between them and their pursuers, taking a complex route through back roads and trails that would be impossible to follow without intimate knowledge of the area. Finally, she pulled into an abandoned barn lot, killing the engine and lights. They sat in the darkness, hearts pounding, listening for any sign of pursuit. "You okay?" Hollis asked softly. Nell nodded, hands still tight on the wheel. "That wasn't animal control." "No," Hollis agreed. "Those were professionals, military or private security. Which means we're getting close to something." She turned to look at him, face pale but determined in the moonlight. "What do we do now?" Before Hollis could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from Rowan. "Marla was here. Threatened my license. They're watching everything. Be careful." Hollis showed Nell the message. "We need to go somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't expect." "I know a place," Nell said. "My grandmother's old cottage. It's not on any recent maps, and the road washed out years ago. We can only reach it by the old hiking trail." Hollis nodded slowly. "Good. But first we need supplies. And we need to warn Rowan. They'll be watching him too." Gideon whined softly from the back seat, pressing his nose against the window. His posture remained alert, protective, as if he understood exactly how much danger they were in. "Why do I get the feeling this is just the beginning?" Nell asked, starting the truck again. "Because it is," Hollis replied, reaching back to rest a hand on Gideon's fur. "But whatever Lorna found, whatever she died trying to protect, it must be big enough to scare them, and that means we can't stop now." They pulled out carefully, staying off the main roads as they planned their next move. The night pressed close around them, full of shadows and hidden threats. But they had each other now, and they had Gideon. Whatever came next, they would face it together. In his pocket, Hollis's phone buzzed again, another message from Rowan. "Found something in Lorna's old files. Need to meet, somewhere they can't watch." The stakes were rising. The danger was real now, personal and immediate. But they were close to something important, something worth all this risk and threat. They just had to stay alive long enough to uncover it. The early morning fog clung to the ground as Hollis's truck crept through the industrial district on the outskirts of Port Westcott. Gideon sat upright in the back seat, his attention laser-focused on something ahead. Every few moments he would let out a low whine. "He's been getting more excited the closer we get," Nell observed from the passenger seat. "Whatever he's tracking, we must be near it." Rowan leaned forward from behind the driver's seat, studying the rows of storage units that lined both sides of the narrow access road. "These were here when Lorna was alive. She used to joke about needing extra space for all her research materials." Gideon's whining grew more insistent. Hollis slowed the truck, watching as the dog's head tracked steadily to the right. "I think he wants us to stop here." They pulled into a small parking area between two long rows of storage units. The facility had seen better days, paint peeling from the metal doors, rust creeping along the edges. Perfect for someone wanting to stay under the radar. As soon as Hollis opened the back door, Gideon leaped out. Instead of running ahead, he waited, looking back at them expectantly. "Lead the way, boy," Rowan said softly. The dog moved with purpose down the row of units, stopping at number 217. He sat down, tail swishing against the concrete. Nell consulted her phone. "This matches the unit number we found in Lorna's old bank records, rented under her maiden name, Lorna Mitchell. The payments are still auto-debiting from an account she set up." Rowan's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out the key they'd discovered hidden in a hollowed-out tennis ball, one of Gideon's old training toys that had been stored at the clinic. "She planned this. All of it." The padlock clicked open. Hollis and Rowan gripped the door handle together and pulled it up. The metal groaned, revealing a space about 10 feet by 15 feet, stacked with plastic storage totes and file boxes. "Look at this," Nell said, pointing her flashlight at a manila envelope taped to the inside of the door, in neat handwriting. "For Rowan, when Gideon brings you." Rowan carefully peeled the envelope free. Inside was a letter and a small digital voice recorder. His breath caught as he unfolded the paper, recognizing his wife's handwriting. "My dearest Rowan, if you're reading this, then Gideon has done exactly what I trained him to do. Find you when the time was right. I know you're probably angry with me for keeping secrets, but I needed to protect you. What I discovered about Pendrick's operations goes beyond simple corruption. He's been dumping industrial waste along the coast for years, poisoning the water and soil. I have proof, all of it cataloged and backed up in these files, but he found out I was investigating. The night of the fire wasn't an accident. They tried to destroy everything, but I managed to get out initially. I knew I was hurt too badly to survive, but I had just enough time to hide the evidence and make sure Gideon would eventually lead you to it. Trust him, my love. He'll help you finish what I started. All my love, Lorna." Rowan's hands shook as he lowered the letter. Nell touched his arm gently while Hollis began examining the boxes. "There's more," Hollis said, lifting out a laptop and several external hard drives. "Look at these labels. Water testing results, soil samples, photos of dumping sites. She documented everything." Nell was going through another box. "These are all training logs for Gideon. She was teaching him specific search patterns, recognition signals, teaching him to find you, Rowan." With trembling fingers, Rowan pressed play on the voice recorder. Lorna's voice filled the small space. "Training log, May 15th. Gideon's progressing well with the recognition exercises. He's learning to identify Rowan's scent from items I've collected. His old sweater, his clinic coat. The goal is to create an unbreakable association between Rowan and safety, trust, and mission completion." Another recording. "June 3rd. Started urban tracking exercises today. Gideon needs to learn to find Rowan even in complex environments. He's showing remarkable focus." The final recording made them all fall silent. "This may be my last log. They're watching the house. I've hidden everything they're looking for, but I know they won't stop. Gideon, my brave boy, find Rowan. Show him the truth. I trust you." Gideon moved closer to Rowan, pressing against his leg. The veterinarian sank to his knees, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. "You knew," he whispered. "All this time, you were following her last command." Hollis and Nell began carefully documenting and photographing everything in the unit. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of systematic environmental crimes, all meticulously recorded by Lorna. Chemical analysis reports showed toxic levels of industrial waste in protected wetlands. Photographs captured trucks dumping under cover of darkness. Financial records revealed a complex web of bribes and shell companies. "She built an airtight case," Hollis said, scanning through one of the files. "This is why Pendrick was so desperate to stop us. One leak of this information would destroy him." Nell was examining more recent satellite photos. "These dumping sites, they're right where they're planning to build that new resort complex. They're literally building on top of their crimes." Rowan stood up slowly, still keeping one hand on Gideon's head. His grief was there, raw and fresh, but now mixed with pride and purpose. She didn't die for nothing. She made sure the truth would come out, one way or another. And she trusted Gideon to make it happen. Nell added softly, watching the dog who had carried this mission for so long. He just needed the right people to help him finish it. They carefully packed the most crucial evidence into their bags, making sure to create multiple backups of all digital files. The rest they would return for later, once they'd taken the first steps to expose Pendrick's crimes. As they closed the storage unit, Rowan paused for one last look inside. "Thank you, Lorna," he whispered. Then he turned to Gideon, who sat watching him with those intelligent eyes. "And thank you, boy. You did exactly what she asked. You found me when I was ready to see the truth." Gideon's tail wagged once, and he led them back to the truck with the same purposeful stride. His mission, the one Lorna had trained him for, was finally complete. Now it was up to them to use what she had preserved to bring justice not only for her death, but for all the damage Pendrick had done to their community. As they drove away, Hollis glanced in the rearview mirror at Gideon, who sat more relaxed now, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Sometimes, Hollis thought, the most loyal hearts carried the heaviest burdens, but they carried them faithfully until the right moment to set them down. Back at Hollis's cabin, they spread Lorna's evidence across the kitchen table. Rain drummed against the windows, while Gideon kept watch by the door, his posture alert but calmer than they'd ever seen him. "We can't just dump all this information at once," Hollis said, sorting through the photographs. "Pendrick would disappear before we could find Ruth." Nell nodded, warming her hands around a mug of coffee. "He's got too many friends in high places. The second he knows we have everything, Ruth becomes—" She didn't finish the sentence. "We need to draw him out," Rowan said quietly. He'd been studying Lorna's training logs, his expression a mix of pride and pain. "Make him think we only know part of what he's hiding." Hollis pulled out a map of Port Westcott's industrial district. "The abandoned cannery. I've seen his men coming and going at odd hours. Gideon got really interested in that area during our searches, but we couldn't get close enough." As if recognizing the location, Gideon's ears perked up. He moved to the table, nose twitching at the map. "That's it, isn't it, boy?" Nell asked. "Is Ruth there?" The dog's tail wagged once, deliberately. It was the same signal they'd seen him give when identifying Ruth's scarf. "Lorna trained him to be subtle with his alerts," Rowan explained, reading from her notes. "No barking or obvious signals that might give away his presence. One tail wag means confirmation." Hollis spread out several photographs showing illegal dumping at the cannery. "So we leak these to the press, just enough to suggest we're onto the environmental violations, but nothing about Ruth or Lorna's death." "He'll panic," Nell said, understanding forming. "He'll think we only know about the dumping. He'll want to move Ruth somewhere else before we can connect all the dots." "And when he moves her," Hollis continued, "we'll be ready. Gideon can track them, and I still remember enough from my medic training to handle any immediate medical needs." Rowan studied the dog who had carried his wife's final message so faithfully. For 2 years, he'd retreated into his grief, seeing only what he'd lost. Now he saw what Lorna had left him, not just evidence, but a chance to make things right. "I'll create a distraction at the clinic," he said. "Request an emergency inspection that'll keep Marla Dykes occupied. She won't be able to interfere." They spent hours planning, checking sight lines and escape routes on the map. Nell would monitor police frequencies from her car, warning them of any official response. Hollis would lead the actual rescue, with Gideon as their guide and guardian. "We'll need to move fast," Hollis warned. "The second they realize those photos are public, they'll start cleaning house. We'll have maybe 2 hours at most." Rowan packed a medical kit while Nell gathered dark clothes and communication equipment. Hollis checked his old field gear, muscle memory from his army days returning as he verified each item. Gideon watched them prepare, his focus unwavering. This was what Lorna had trained him for, not just to deliver a message, but to complete a mission, to save a life. "Dawn tomorrow," Hollis said finally. "We leak the photos to the morning news cycle, then move in when they're scrambling to respond." They all understood the risks. If they failed, Pendrick would destroy the evidence and probably them along with it. But the alternative, leaving Ruth in his hands, letting Lorna's death go unanswered, wasn't an option. Rowan knelt beside Gideon, seeing in those amber eyes the same steady courage he'd loved in Lorna. "We're ready now, boy," he whispered, "ready to finish what she started." The dog pressed his head against Rowan's hand, a gesture of comfort and commitment. Tomorrow, they would turn from reactive to proactive. Tomorrow, they would bring Ruth home. Through the cabin windows, they could see the storm clearing, stars emerging in patches of dark sky. None of them slept much that night, each lost in their own thoughts of what morning would bring. But they were together, united in purpose, with a loyal heart to guide them. Gideon kept his vigil by the door, waiting for dawn and the chance to complete his longest mission. The time for hiding was over. Now was the time for rescue. The moonless night cloaked their approach to the cannery. Broken windows gaped like hungry mouths in the building's weathered facade. Hollis led the way, with Gideon padding silently beside him. Years of rust had weakened the chain-link fence, creating gaps large enough to slip through. Inside, the air hung thick with the ghosts of fish and salt. Their flashlights carved narrow paths through darkness, revealing conveyor belts frozen in time and hooks dangling like metal fingers from the ceiling. Every footstep echoed despite their care. Gideon moved with focused intensity, his nose working constantly. At each junction he paused, tested the air, then chose their path with quiet certainty. The dog's training showed in every movement, no wasted motion, no unnecessary noise. They passed loading docks filled with suspicious barrels, their contents marking another of Pendrick's crimes. But tonight wasn't about environmental evidence. Tonight was about Ruth. Nell's voice whispered through their earpieces. Still quiet on police channels, no movement on the perimeter. They climbed to the second floor, where offices overlooked the processing floor. Gideon's pace quickened. At a heavy metal door, he stopped and gave his signal, one deliberate wag. Hollis tested the handle. Locked. He pulled out the tools he'd prepared, working by touch more than sight. The lock surrendered with a soft click. Inside, Ruth Dameron lay curled on a thin mattress, her wrists bound with zip ties. Her eyes went wide at their entrance, but before she could make a sound, Hollis pressed a finger to his lips. "We're here to help," he whispered, showing her his knife. "Hold still." The zip ties parted easily. Ruth rubbed her wrists, tears streaming silently down her face. She looked younger than 16, small and scared but alive. "Can you walk?" Hollis asked. She nodded, then pointed urgently at a security camera in the corner. Hollis's heart sank. They'd disabled the ones they'd spotted outside, but this one... A harsh buzzer shattered the night. Red emergency lights began strobing through the building, turning shadows into a frenzied dance. "Multiple vehicles approaching!" Nell's voice crackled with urgency. "They're moving fast." "Run!" Hollis commanded. He helped Ruth up as Gideon took point, leading them toward their planned escape route. They made it halfway down the stairs before flashlight beams swept the processing floor below. Voices called out, hard and angry. The metal stairs rang with their footsteps as they changed direction, seeking another way out. "Well, well." The voice froze them in place. Clive Pendrick stood on the landing above, backlit by emergency lights. Two men flanked him, their weapons trained on the group. "I had hoped you'd try something foolish like this." Hollis pushed Ruth behind him. Gideon's hackles rose, a low growl building in his chest. "It's over, Pendrick," Hollis said. "The evidence is already out there." Those amusing little photos? Pendrick's smile never reached his eyes. hardly worth mentioning. But kidnapping accusations from a traumatized teenager? Missing evidence that could have saved poor Lorna Keene? Now those are serious matters. He gestured to his men. Take them, all of them, including that troublesome dog. The armed men started forward. Gideon's growl deepened. In the strobing red light, shadows twisted and merged, turning the cannery into a nightmare landscape of metal and menace. For one heartbeat, time seemed suspended. Then chaos erupted. The dog launched himself at the nearest gunman, a gray missile of fur and fury. Hollis tackled the second man as Ruth screamed. Pendrick shouted orders that were lost in the confusion of bodies and shadows. Metal rang against metal. Flashlights spun wild arcs through darkness. The strobing emergency lights transformed everything into a broken film reel of frozen moments. Gideon's teeth finding an arm. A gun clattering downstairs. Ruth stumbling against a railing. Pendrick's face contorted with rage. More footsteps thundered below. More voices joined the chaos. Their carefully planned rescue had become a desperate fight for survival in a maze of rust and shadows. Smoke billowed through the hallway as Pendrick's men spread gasoline across the lower floor. The sharp crack of the first flames echoed like gunshots, followed by the roar of spreading fire. Acrid smoke stung their eyes and throats. "The tide's coming in!" Nell shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. The storm surge was flooding the ground floor exits, trapping them between fire and rising water. A thunderous crack split the air. Hollis looked up just as an ancient support beam gave way. He shoved Ruth clear, but couldn't move fast enough himself. The beam crashed down, pinning him beneath its weight. Pain exploded through his leg. "Hollis!" Nell screamed. Rowan rushed forward to help, but a shot rang out. He staggered, clutching his shoulder as blood spread across his shirt. Pendrick's bullet had found its mark. Through the thickening smoke, Gideon darted purposefully toward a pile of old fishing equipment. The dog emerged with a length of rope clenched in his teeth, racing to Ruth's side. She grabbed it, understanding instantly. "Nell, help me!" Ruth looped the rope around the beam, while Nell secured the other end to a solid pipe. Together with Gideon pulling alongside them, they strained against the weight. The beam shifted inch by agonizing inch until Hollis could drag himself free. Water sloshed at the bottom of the stairs now, mixing with blood and gasoline. The flames cast dancing shadows through the smoke as they fought for survival, their breaths coming in desperate gasps. Their only way out was up, but Rowan could barely stand, and Hollis's leg threatened to buckle with each step. Gasping for breath, Hollis pulled himself up onto the rusty catwalk that circled the cannery's upper level. Below, flames danced on the water's surface. He pressed record on his phone just as Pendrick strutted into view on the opposite walkway. "You think you've won?" Pendrick sneered, his expensive suit now smoke-stained. "No one can prove anything. The waste never reaches a ledger. No paper trail, no evidence." The confession echoed clearly through the burning building. But suddenly, metal groaned beneath Pendrick's feet. The catwalk gave way with a terrible screech, leaving him dangling by one hand above the inferno. In the chaos below, Marla made her final desperate move. She lunged at Ruth with outstretched hands, but Nell was faster. She grabbed a signal flare from her emergency kit and ignited it, forcing Marla back with its bright flame. Before Marla could recover, Gideon launched himself forward, his powerful body slamming into her. The dog pinned her down, growling deeply until she stopped struggling. Police sirens wailed closer as deputies finally arrived. Through the smoke, Hollis could see their flashlights sweeping the building. Pendrick hung suspended, his arrogance replaced by raw fear, until officers secured him safely. Though, he hardly deserved it. "It's over," Hollis said quietly, still recording as the deputies read Pendrick his rights. The autumn sun warmed the veterinary clinic's front steps as Hollis pushed open the glass door. Inside, Rowan was finishing up with a patient, his injured shoulder nearly healed. The headlines in the waiting room's newspaper spelled out Pendrick's downfall in bold letters: federal indictment for environmental crimes and attempted murder. Marla Dykes faced her own jail time for conspiracy and assault. Ruth's testimony sealed their fate, Rowan said, emerging from the exam room. His eyes held a spark that had been missing since Lorna's death. She's doing well in counseling. Her parents can't thank you enough. Rowan gestured for Hollis to follow him into his office. On the desk sat a folder labeled Port Westcott Search and Rescue Initiative. I want to restart Lorna's program, Rowan explained. We need a skilled leader for the volunteer unit, someone who understands both people and dogs. He met Hollis's gaze. Will you do it? Hollis smiled, glancing down at Gideon sitting alertly at his feet. On one condition, this guy's my partner. Later that afternoon, they stood at Lorna's memorial marker. Nell squeezed Hollis's hand as he carefully placed the stitched collar tag among the fresh flowers. Gideon sat perfectly still, as if standing guard over his former trainer's memory. She'd be proud, Nell whispered, leaning into Hollis's shoulder. Of all of you. Hollis nodded, feeling the weight of purpose settle comfortably on his shoulders. His solitary days were behind him now, replaced by the warmth of Nell's love and Gideon's unwavering loyalty. Together they would carry Lorna's legacy forward, bringing hope to others just as they had found it themselves. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.